Hello everyone. I thank Let's Talk Tattva and my friend and colleague Himanshu, as well as the Philosophy Project, and Sanal Mohan sir for this wonderful talk so far. And without any further ado, let's just get into the work as such. My area is going to be what we are going to do is we are going to look at Pulleli Kunju as a text, and specifically the notion of Sneham as it sort of emerges in the work. So the first thing that I kind of have to make clear is that in the history of Malayalam literature, Pulleli Kunju as a text is always identified as a novel. That's what you see in, like, for example, like Panikkar's history of Malayalam literature, or even the editions that you find. Like it's an old novel that is often that's how it's sort of understood. So like that's the first intervention that we will sort of be making. It is to say that Pulleli Kunju is not a text but rather a polemical dialogue. The kind of the structure that the Pulleli Kunju has is that it's a dialogue with two characters, and there is a discussion that is happening around basically a religious dogma. And these kinds of polemical dialogues used to be quite popular, not popular, traditional insofar as Christian missionary works are concerned. If you are someone who's like familiar with theology, you would be come across works like Saint Jerome's dialogue against the Pelagians, or Theodoret is a very famous polemical dialogue. And in this particular time itself, you have another work called Makti Tangal's Katora Kudra, which is also a form of a dialogue. So I personally find, and in that regard, I just consider Pulleli Kunju as a work which is a three-part polemical dialogue centered around a titular character, Pulleli Kunju Pillai. And it has a third-person narrator who is the only Christian, and he is just only called Mudal Pidikkaran, or the treasurer. And in the work, Pulleli Kunju is represented as a critique of various practices within that 19th century Hindu religion. He identifies these practices as untouchability and idolatry with the common notion of ajnanam, or ignorance. The work has three parts, as mentioned earlier. The first part is mainly an engagement with Kaipala Ramapanikar, which is another character that you see recurring, around the concept of caste and untouchability. In the second dialogue, you find the practice of idolatry being critically analyzed. And the third part is basically not a dialogue, it is a sort of an elucidation of a song called Tiruvavadara Mahatmyam, written by, it's a salvific literature, written about the life of Jesus Christ by a man named Karl Portier. And Kunju requests Karl Portier to do that. In the objective of this text is to basically center this work, sort of bring out the unity of the text around the elucidation of the notion of Sneham. And so a few words that if we could say about Sneham is that Sneham as a term becomes the stand-in word for love later in Malayalam language, like especially in Malayalam romantic literature, most popularized mostly by someone like Kumaranasha. And so you can also see the same kind of word that is being used here, and the work essentially is in many ways written with the specific intention of that particular the realization, the elucidation of that concept. So the other thing that we need to get around is that it's a work that sort of like exists between this violent fiction and reality. You find a lot of references to actual historical events that went around this time, like for example the Dutch invasion of some place that the Kunju references to these works, like the Jewish communities that used to live in places like Mala. The Changa revolt gets a mention in some part, and also instances of like the brutal violences that used to happen against lower caste people during the time. So I have put a small part of an anecdote that Kunju has basically translated for part of the work. It was the month of Kanni, We saw a bunch of Pulleiers rushing towards us from the other side, carrying rice bags. They were around 30 or 40, including children. Since the road we were both on was covered from either sides, they couldn't see how close they were to us. When they saw us, they ran. Bhatteri, which is one of his childhood friends, is an upper caste child, immediately ordered them to be captured. Pappu and all chased them around, and a pregnant Pulleya woman with them could not catch up with the rest. Adiotil Pappu then picked up a Pulleya kid and hit the Pulleya woman on her back with it. She fell from the hit and delivered her baby right there on the ground. It's a lot more brutal in the prose. Like this is the description is just so graphic and violent. Kaipala Ramapanikar essentially tells him to stop. And like after that they beat up everyone they could capture and threw 4 or 5 kids into the woods. Pappu and the gang broke their rice bags and threw them into the woods. So this is the kind of events. This is the world that from the jump that the work essentially portrays. It ultimately ties back into this notion of Sneham or love, for a simplified English word. It comes down to it's a world that is just basically abjectly cruel to someone who is living in the amongst the lower castes, who is basically a slave. It's not just merely of a world for them without dignity, but of just complete dehumanization. So that is like a first boundary that one has to fundamentally get to the other side. So, and the other work that we need to, so the other important nuance that one needs to mention in this regard is Ajnana Kuttaram, which is another work, an acts of ignorance, and the tradition of anti-caste literature. So, Ajnana Kuttaram is a work that was published earlier in 1835 by a man named Sir Joseph Fenn. And this work was, it was then later published by CMS in 1870s. You see Kunju referring to this work in this quoting poems from this work in this particular. And Ajnana Kuttaram is mostly about, which is again, like we'll come back to this theme again. It's translated. The word itself is translated as acts against ignorance, but also acts of ignorance. Ajnana Kuttaram can be both. And the work it sort of ends towards the idea that the lower castes essentially are in a state of not just physical and emotional degradation, but rather of kind of a soteriological degradation, kind of a spiritual situation in which there is no salvation provided to them in any religions. They have no Vedas, no Tantras, no Mantras, nothing. There is no Luka in the twilight for them. That's kind of how the work itself ends. And Christianity itself is presented as this kind of a, not just rather a physical, providing the lower caste with a kind of a physical sort of argument or like some kind of a liberation to the lower caste, but rather of a salvation, like a proper soteriology in which they are treated with a sense of dignity. So, and the other work is the Tiruvavadara Mahatmyam. Like we came back to this, like the third part, Tiruvavadara Mahatmyam, which is again like a relation between caste and Christian dogma comes across in this work. So, the elucidation of a song titled Tiruvavadara Mahatmyam, the interesting thing that Ulloor S. Parameswara here writes is that this work, which is portrayed as written by a Tamil poet in Pullelikkunju, is actually written by Archdeacon Koshy himself. So it's in many ways like it's him doing his own, the work, the elucidation of his own work in the third part. And it sort of like ties everything up in a way to like sort of make caste and Christianity sort of like related in a certain way. Let's begin properly. And so the idea essentially what we are going to do, there are so many slides here. So we are just going to basically breeze through everything in a certain way. So let's look at this particular passage, which I personally believe is the most important passage from this work. Where is love, the great gift all human beings have for each other, Panikar? Oh, love that is the dearest to the Lord. Love here means Sneham. Love that brings happiness to the holiest of creatures. Love that makes this wretched world equal to the heavens. Where did it go away? This river from the heavens that must flow in all directions and cools the world has stopped by the barriers made by the demon of caste division, was it not? Because of that, this elixir that is love remains here and there and gets dried up eventually. This axe from hell, which is caste system, has butchered the human race into pieces. Look, head here, torso there, hand here, legs there. My God, when will we get to see this butchered body joined together? So this is basically how the Kunju sort of like juxtaposes the ideal of Sneham against the caste society that they are sort of living in. So what we can see here is that this is the most important character of this notion of Sneham. It is that Sneham has this very dual nature. At first, it is a love that exists between human beings, that sort of unites human beings together as this one race. But at the same time, it also has this metaphysical import, this transcendental idea. It's also something that unites human being with God and God with human being. And the second part is very important. And this relation that exists between God and the human and man, which is a finite creature, to another man. These ideals are essentially blocked to create this caste society, which not only creates divisions between human beings through untouchability and through like dividing human race into these many different pieces through the word that is used here, again, axe from hell, is it also creates divisions between human beings and God. And that is where the idea of idolatry comes in. Like the idol itself is placed as a sort of an idea that, it blocks human being from like truly attaining what it even means to be truly liberated, to truly have salvation. So in a way, an argument against caste system and idolatry is sort of necessary as far as he is considered to even have a possibility of Sneham. And that's what he's sort of like trying to, in Kunju, he's like basically trying to do in the three parts of the work. So this is basically what he's sort of doing. Like, love is enjoyed by God. It is also again, love essentially becomes, and this dual nature is very important. This character that love has, which is basically not just merely a metaphysical import, like this transcendental idea that connects human beings to God, but also or like human beings to some absolute being, but rather a social principle which connects human beings to each other, and without which, like a society of caste system which sort of does alienates human beings from another, sort of is a world without Sneham. It's a world that does not have these sorts of connections. So and that's kind of what makes it in the first part. It's very imperative for Kunju to assert the idea to reject Brahmanical authority. Like specifically the issue that he has with, so the first person that we see as a bigger defender of the caste system is a Tamil Brahmin named Shamu. And in Shamu only speaks in Tamil. Like throughout the dialogue, it's like it's Tamil versus Malayalam. That's sort of like an idea. You sort of like see it in the work. And Shamu Navi's whole position is that Brahman basically exists as this mediator between divinity and the lower castes. So he's basically the priest. It's only through Brahmin, through serving Brahmin, one can sort of appease to God. And Brahmin itself is basically the Lord of all things. And this is what the quote that we sort of see here. Like this is from so Shamu Navi quotes a lot of Sanskrit works to basically make this argument. So the Brahmin is the overlord of all castes. He must be given donations with piety and subservience. Brahmin is the lord of the earth who saves those who gives him from this ocean of suffering that is this world. So soteriology or the apprehension of infinity or the apprehension of the absolute for the lower caste would require this mediator, which is the Brahmin. And the rejection of this idea is again like becomes important for him as far as for Kunju as far as Sneham is concerned. So Kunju throughout the work undermines the authority of Kaipala Shamu Navi in the first part. So he sort of makes this argument, which then we see again reverberating with someone like Narayana Guru. Swami, Brahma created you and me, as you have said. We both have our origins in one body. If the brothers who are born out of the union of two bodies and of husband and wife, we who have originated from one body must be equal. Would it be not? And you sort of see the same argument like coming in many different ways throughout this particular age. And the sort of the argument what we see here is that caste system isn't just rejected, it rejected basis on the idea that it divides human beings. And there is a lot more nuance to that in that regard. Like it's an unjust division, and even if it is a division, it's a division that ultimately makes human beings weak. There's a whole portion of the work where it just asserts that the reason why Malayalis lost to the Dutch is so there is a whole portion where the Dutch invasion is brought up. Where they lost to the Dutch is precisely because of the fact that caste system exists and untouchables didn't want to help the Nayars, and that kind of society is what we live in. And so there is that. But at the same time, caste, the Brahmanical authority as much is specially rejected, precisely because of the idea that the very antipathy towards the priesthood. It's almost this Protestant idea of like, why do we need to pay you this obeisance when we can sort of achieve that through our own. And let's scroll past okay, yeah. So in the second part, I think we need to rush a little bit. The idolatry is then becomes a bit more of a problem. So it's again, so in the caste system, it's a relation between man and God, as well as man to man. So that is the rejection of caste system is important as far as Sneham is concerned, precisely because these relations are mediated and obfuscated by caste system and Brahmanical authority. Idolatry is a particular modality in which the relation between God and man is sort of mediated by this idea of the idol. You cannot pay obeisance to the logic of idolatry is the idea that God has to be represented by something. Divinity has to be represented by some finite idol, and without which you cannot even make sense of a God. You don't even believe in a God if you don't believe in an idol. So in the first part of the work, Pulleli Kunju, like we see Kunju just gets kicked out from Kaipala Ramapadikar's house on the accusation that he's an atheist, he's a Gnostic. The idea being that he rejects idolatry, that means a rejection of Godhood itself. The idol itself is the God. And Kunju in many ways rejects this very idea, because for him God cannot just merely be a stone that remains as this sort of can be represented by human beings in a particular way, but rather God exists as this force that constantly is active in the world, that cannot be represented in any sort of way, that has an actual imperative as far as the world is concerned. So that's the part where he just sort of takes the argument here. So let's go further. So yeah, this is what we see here, like in the quotes that we are like sort of presenting. So in the second part of the work, he takes up an argument with a figure who is just merely called a Nambudri. Nambudri presents an analogical argument, like saying that words like ka has to be represented by letter when it is a sound. So like the representation of God through idols is in many ways the same way, because you kind of have to represent things like in that way. And this is precisely the idea of the representational logic. Like you sort of have to objectify God in a certain way according to this logic. Like you have to present idol as a mediator that exists between God and the human being. And Kunju does this interesting thing where he just like rejects the very the analogy itself. Is it not just so? Is it enough to just look at the similarities between objects without considering the differences? Even if the utterance and God are similar in the formlessness, how different are they otherwise? If one understands the difference, one could never make such an analogy. What kind of formlessness is utterance? Does it have likes and dislikes? Are there obligations according to it? Do we say that you must do this or not that, otherwise the utterance will be angry? We can do whatever we want with utterance. It is not the same with God. So the idea is for him is that idolatry essentially makes God into this almost neutered, sterile character who's not really interested in the life of human beings. And as such, it sort of like leads human beings into a life of like precisely without God, which leads to all kinds of decadences in a certain way. So in the third part, the elucidation in many ways, what we see is that Jesus Christ becomes an important character as to this entire thing in that particular way, because what is Jesus Christ? Jesus Christ is God in human form. Jesus Christ presents or represents the possibility that the human finite form can in many ways apprehend divinity or the infinity of God. And that is the salvation is available. Salvific possibility, the soteriology of human beings is possible precisely because of the fact that Jesus Christ is a finite human being, and he's not just any kind of finite human being with like imperfections. He's a finite man without any kind of moral imperfections that Kunju accuses all the other sort of gods to have. He is precisely God in human form and godly in his characters, and he is in that way, he's just like the apotheosis of Sneham as an ideal itself. Yeah, it's. So I want to end this particular discussion to just bring out, so we wanted to bring to attention two different things. One is that Sneham and the soteriological question, what it means. The notion of Sneham, what we see here, is that it has a very particular modality. It is a very complex relationship that exists between man to man, as well as man to God and God to man. There is a metaphysical as well as a physical import to it. There's a social as well as a sort of a transcendental import to it. But then throughout which also in the case of anti-caste struggle, sort of encapsulates the very soteriological demand that caste system sort of makes as far as these reformers are concerned. So if you look at figures like, say, Ayya Vaikunta Swamigal, who comes like decades before Guru, in his struggle against caste system, in his struggle towards this idea of like an egalitarian society, he started an organization in 1836. He himself considers himself to be an avatar of Vishnu. And then he just sort of becomes this person who will bring the lower caste into this new yuga outside of the Brahmanical yuga. And then if you look at figures like afterwards, figures like Guru even, like the idea of the question of soteriology becomes as pertinent as the question of political liberation. And that's what Sneham really encapsulates. Sneham perfectly encapsulates this notion that, social liberation, through this idea of fraternity and equality can never really be divorced from a kind of a soteriological idea of liberty and the soteriological liberation. And this idea then becomes towards the very end, like when you come to someone like Kumar and Ashan, it rightfully gets the kind of criticism because it tends towards the transcendental idea. And that's where the criticism that P.K. Balakrishnan sort of levies at Kumar and Ashan. Ashan becomes the Sneha Gayakan, the balladeer of love. And Ashan's particular kind of love sort of becomes less, the social aspect becomes less important, and the transcendental becomes more played out. So yeah, that's the one thing that we want to emphasize. And the second is it is more of a question of Pulleli Kunju as a polemical text. So a recognition of Pulleli Kunju as a polemical text rather than as merely a novel is very important, because when you look at figures, when you works like Jyotiba Phule's Gulamgiri or E. Madhavan's Swadhantra Samudayam, which comes in 1934, these are polemical works. They have a very brutal way of like writing, which provides no charitable interpretation towards the other side. They take away, they are very partisan, and they take a very clear position as far as caste system and all these ideas are concerned. They do not operate in the same kind of philosophical engagements that you might find in classical or even like the other even to an academic philosophy that we might find. It's very it others in a very particular way, and you sort of see that particular kind of engagement in Pulleli Kunju's novels as well, because even though it's a dialogue, both of the dialogues essentially, like all the dialogues that Kunju sort of engages with has a very violent conclusion. So the Shamu, the first one, the Tamil Brahmin engagement that he has, sort of ends with him just basically insulting the other guy, just like to such a degree, to debunking the Brahmin to such a degree that the Brahmin just essentially curses him, calls him a Chandala, and then just gets out of the situation. And in the case of the Nambudiri situation, the debate just ends with Kunju basically rejecting to ever engage with the analogy and mocks the Nambudiri to even bringing up the analogy in the first place. So, it never takes a kind of this charitable approach that one might find elsewhere. And, how much can we really. I personally believe that that particular kind of that particular modality of engagement with caste, with a matter such as caste, is philosophically significant, and it has its own validity. Like in academic spaces, we sort of understand how much the value of knowledge essentially plays, and scripture essentially plays the role in subjugation and justification of oppressive systems. So then you raises the question is that if knowledge plays that kind of importance in that kind of particular kind of oppression, then a particular kind of uncharitability and ignorance to a particular certain kinds of modes of being has a particular liberatory value. So again, we comes back to the question that we had in our title, like the acts against acts of ignorance or enlightenment, which again goes back to this idea of Ajnana Kutaram, the acts against ignorance or acts of ignorance. We could say that this particular mode of society, as Sanal Mohan has said, was construed as a dark society, as an ignorant society. But at the same time, the liberator, the salvific character, who is Kunju here, could also be considered as an ignorant subject. He's a polemicist who is ignorant of a particular mode of thinking, and he doesn't want to entertain that mode of thinking at all. And that's where we sort of want to end this discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you to both the speakers for such profound post-colonial explorations. So now we'd like to open up the discussion and question round. So if anybody that has any question, please do raise your hand or type out your question in the chat. We'll try our best to accommodate you.
Yeah, we can go ahead with Keerthana first, and then we have others. Please go ahead. You can unmute, I guess.
Hello, good evening. It was a very insightful talk. Actually, it's not a question. I wanted to ask where could we access the dialogue of
Sorry, Keerthana, your voice is a little bit is not fine. Can you please try again?
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So mine is not a question actually. I wanted to ask Shahsad that we can access this dialogue of Pulleli Kunju by Koshy.
So Pulleli Kunju is actually available in Chinda Publishers. This is the copy that I got. It's part of this novel Parama series. It will also have the introductory essay written by Sanal Mohan sir in the beginning. You can find it in Flipkart and other shows, but you could also go to Chinda Publishers as such.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
We have a question in the chat. Would you like to speak it, sir? Mr. Balakrishnan Sadman.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Son, I don't feel like I'm qualified to speak about this. You're the historian, so you go ahead.
No, Shahsad, could you please read out this question for me if it is
Okay.
on the chat box?
Would you like to?
Okay. The question is one more. Yeah. Had some urbanization or jobs in some manufacturing begun to become possible around that time? In other words, the actual scope for social mobility was also going up around that time. Thank you.
Oh, okay, that's a very interesting question. Now, because we have been talking about mostly the southern region of Kerala, and at that point of time, we don't find modern industries of that kind, but we have examples of towards the end of 19th century, or say from 1860s, etc. Some of the enterprises started by the LMS or slightly earlier, so kind of lace making and other kinds of activities had been there. But modern industries of the kind that we are familiar subsequently happens, I think, in the southern part of Kerala in the 1930s, 40s that time. So we had to wait for a little while. But the plantations have already started. So in the last decades of the 19th century, or maybe from 1860s onwards, we find beginnings towards that coffee, tea, and other kinds of things have been happening. And also in the Ashambu Hills, we read about coffee plantations emerging in the South Travancore. And in the north of Kerala, we have Basel Mission, Basel Evangelical Mission, based in uh, Calicut and Mangalore. They had started tile industries and also weaving industry, tile and weaving industry. So even today, we know that those things are concentrated there, particularly tile industry. So those things were happening, but not the way probably that would have happened subsequently. Now, of course, the larger question, but is to talk about the Madras presidency. And the kind of economic ventures taking place there. But for those in the southern region of Kerala, I think access was a little bit limited, although we find people going for modern education and so on. But I think if we go by the kind of histories that we have now, I mean, academic researches and so on, is to talk about the plantations developing. That was happening in a very big way, and also the other kinds of industries had to wait. But generally, there was certain kind of modern transformation taking place, and that's what led to by the 1890s, these interesting case of Malayali Memorial, Irava Memorial, etc. People demanding, jobs and other kinds of things for them in the evolving sectors of the. I mean, that's. I mean, it's a little more than that, but these things were happening. People demanding more and more representation in the evolving economy, evolving opportunities, and so on. And Yeravas were left behind in that, although they were also signatories. So subsequently, we have Yerava Memorial happening. So on the whole, this well, let's say that we do definitely see developments of that kind taking place, but modern industries and other kinds of things were yet to develop. But still, you have, towards the end of 19th century, industrial exhibitions taking place in Travancore and so on. And by early 20th century, when, for example, this is my last point for want of time, SNDP was formed. We find, the Iravas had evolved as very significant players in the evolving economy, or they had already done this in the 19th century, transforming themselves as at least a very sizable segment of the population within the community as entrepreneurial class who were capable of mobilizing capital for investment. And let us also remember, following what Shahsad already mentioned, Guru's case. And Guru was in favor of, was investing in industrial ventures in addition to the kind of developments in education and so on. So we have this kinds of very interesting things happening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, so before anybody else asks a question, I probably would like to make an observation here. It's not a question really. So I've not read this book, but it seems to mostly be about the acceptance of Christianity, as far as I understand. But I could not help but make a few parallels to Chinua Achebe's landmark book, Things Fall Apart. It's about the Igbo warrior Okonkwo, if I'm right, if I remember, and him resisting this Christian change. So in this book, there is a mourning for what was lost, what was before Christianity. It's very interesting because this book is about leaving it behind, what was before Christianity, while that book is about mourning for what was lost. Seems like it's two sides of the same coin almost.
Yeah, so I think a great place to start as far as this particular mode of thinking is Dilip Menon has written this essay on the subaltern novel,
Right.
reading Saraswati Vijayam specifically.
Uh-huh.
And there, like, there is this sort of this play on how, especially in India, like, you know, the on one hand you have the colonial and the colonial elite, which
Right.
basically like the upper caste, who are like basically the first nationalists,
Mhm.
and like they have this sort of anxiety around colonization, essentially taking away their identity.
Mhm.
On the other hand, you have the lower caste essentially is placed as a sort of in a place where they sort of have to play their cards in a particular way to capture the some space that has created by colonization
Right.
in a in an effective way. So like one of the things that you find in that the late 19th century to like the early 20th century, almost all of the anti-caste leaders that emerged, especially in this particular space, were very pro British. So someone like Guru, for example, you know, the British are our masters. He's our guru because he's the one that gave us sannyasa. And like he says that because he's someone who's came from a lower caste and he's a guru. That would not have been possible this classical world that the nationalist wants to bring back. And someone like Sahodar Nayyappan also in that way. So like yeah, it's a game that one has to sort of play, and where the lower caste in this country essentially has to in many ways be pro-colonial, for
Right.
a lack of a better word, to sort of gain any kind of liberation.
It's very interesting. Thank you so much. So I think you're muted.
Sorry, I just have a reflection on this question by our colleague. In Achebe's case, the kind of community that he talks about, the Igbo community, and also that Okanko, that if I got his name right,
Yes.
and he is someone who is from that peasant community, and he's a peasant with some means, isn't it? And he talks about his obi, that that compound where he is, and the sorry that compound where he lives with his extended family, wives, and all that, and also the farm that we had. And now here, in the case of the extreme low caste, the Dalit communities here in Kerala, although this missionary stuff might remain the same, but they were a propertyless group who were there to give their labor power alone. So therefore, the broader macro level comparison that we find with a text like things fall apart, may not be okay with the kind of stuff when it comes to the extreme lower sections of her society. And also, think about this Ikmefina, that boy who got, we don't. I think it must have been a sacrifice, or something similar to that, because this boy comes from a defeated group, no, if I remember it correctly. So we have, but here in this part of the world that we have been talking about, in the 19th century, human sacrifice was taking place. Sacrifice of the Pullei men, and including even young girls. So I have read some archival materials that refer to this. And if we go to a place where a lot of people visit Kerala, the Kuttanad region, backwater area, so you have on the uh, rice fields, you have these rice fields and barns and so on. On many places, you find small shrines dedicated to the Paraya Pulia laborers who were sacrificed there. And they became the guardian spirits, the person who was killed there, whose blood actually glued the outer bunds of these paddy fields. They were there to guard the paddy fields of the masters. So you have a very complex kind of dynamics existing here. So therefore, the other argument I definitely understand, the larger missionary thing and all that. But then when it comes to the specifics of Igbo and this particular case here, we find things getting loosened a lot. You cannot pull the strings together to really provide a fantastic kind of comparative example. So I just want to my colleague to think about it. Or I mean, thank you for raising this. That's absolutely important. But then, as a researcher in social science, this sort of things have been there. I just thought I will share this. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. That was very enlightening. So, anybody else?
So maybe we can move towards conclusion. Hello?
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone has any questions or comments? No. Do you want to say something, Tanima? Okay. Fine. This, okay. I also wanted to ask one question. Thank you, Sanal sir and Shahzad, for the whole presentation. Um, this is coming from, of course, the discussion which we had today about a very, in a sense, important phenomenon that took place in modern Kerala. But I wonder, like in this situation right now, as we and the question which we always face, this is maybe to a question addressing Dr. Sanil. How do you think that the pre-modern texts on discussing caste or discussing society, whether you take like not only the Manusmriti but Yajnavalkya Samhita and all of them also, where you have constant imagination of substitution. It's not just one role that's taking place. So if you have one school of Dharma Shastra in Bengal that's being changed somewhere, let's say if it comes towards uh, Madhya Pradesh or in other parts of the, according to the king, of course, and so there are different interpretations of the rules of the caste in that sense also. Now, in present scenario where we are trying to think, or let's say in your research, how do these pre-modern texts play a role in your thinking about certainly the social structure in the caste? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not a researcher of this particular pre-modern period, but as someone who has been teaching history for a long time, I'm familiar with the debates in this particular kind of area of specialization. So, uh, you see these dharmashastras of various kinds, or this Manu's text and similar texts that have been rendered in different versions in different parts of India, that really was very significant in the organization of the structures of kingdom, the power structures that existed in various parts of India. Now, even in the southern extremities of India, including Kerala, we find local rendering of these texts. Uh, this is a thing which has been studied by scholars on customary law. Let's say generally about the legal discourses in pre-modern Kerala society. So, for example, a different kind of needy texts. I mean, we have historians who worked on needy texts for the Telugu region and so on. Similar kind of texts in Malayalam, they are referred to as Nidhisaram and other kinds of texts. And in fact, these texts have ideas derived from Manusmriti and similar texts. So, therefore, a cursory reading of this historical text will tell us that uh, in many parts of India, including that of Kerala, these texts definitely had a hold on the customary legal practices. And to the extent that in all the 19th century kind of writings, either in Malayalam or in English, they all refer to the local potentates, wielding judicial power, customary power, who had the power to dispense with justice, killing people, and so on. So therefore, the corporal punishments that we actually see in all, even I think even under the British rule, it was not that the whole of Kerala, for example, as I'm talking about, where came under the British control. In the Malabar region, still today people talk about Nair or Nambiar families who had the actual judicial power, who had maintained the gallows and all these kinds of things. So we have these different histories, and then when we go back in time, so the punishment and the kind of stuff related to this, what I call the structural violence which maintained this society, was very much in tune with this text. And today, people through this revision of NCRT syllabus talk all kinds of rubbish and nonsense about who brought in violence in India and all that kind of rubbish I'm referring to. Violence has been very much part of Indian political system, no matter to which period we are talking about. And kings were not never sanguine to this whole question. They were very much the practitioners, no matter whether they were Mughals or Cholas, or name those goddamn fellows. You have this, the old rulers of India, whichever part of India you may want to refer to, whichever religion they belonged to. They were not religious at all. Their idea was to amass power like any politician of the day. Politicians do not care religion even now. Same with the earlier politicians who might have gone by some religious name, but their idea was to amass power. So, therefore, these texts that we have been referring to, they were the playbooks by which people managed stuff. And we have this whole histories of structural violence. Just read Upinder Singh's work. We get to know, how these things have developed in the early Indian society, and develop those arguments from there down to the 19th or 20th century. We get a fantastic picture of how these things have been happening. And for the traditional kind of stuff, I mean, this practice of this jurisprudence and other things, I think these texts, ancient texts, continue to be very, very significant. And they were the ones who were translated into other regions of India. I mean, even during the early phase of the British. Why else these British guys would read all this stuff from the stuff along with the Pandits of the Varanasi? Any decent student of history would know this. They learned these Hindu laws. They also learned the Islamic Persian kind of tradition during the early days of the British Raj. And does it mean that the local fellows, those who wielded political and economic power, ceased to hold this? Not at all. So, therefore, I think these texts remained as very, very significant. All these dharma texts, and today people come with very outlandish kind of interpretations and arguments. So definitely, we need to encounter these sort of arguments to show that they were definitely against any kind of ordinary person in India, be it any part of any period of time. I don't know, even during the days of say Ashoka Maurya, things for the ordinary folks were different. I don't think so. And not so much during the any of the so-called Hindu rulers of India. So therefore, what we need is a right perspective to understand the long continuing the structural violence and the power structure that sustained it. That continued, and even it continues even today in many parts of North India. This is my last point. The other day I was speaking with a cousin of mine who spent some time in Karnataka, who told me that life there is horrible. Don't compare it with how you live in Kerala. You may have a criticism of Kerala, but then remember that it is a better place. I mean, there may be some kind of bias involved in the speaker's kind of idea, but the fact that the everyday violence of caste is still prevailing in many parts of India, we need to be really skeptical about, and better NCRTs used to exist and similar organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for answering the question, sir, and thank you to both for speakers for this important session and discussions we had. We may, I guess, as this was a successful session, have later collaborations, and we may inform you about further discussions with Let's Talk Tattva and the Philosophy Project. Yeah, thank you very much.
Goodbye. Yeah, it was great to be with you. See you all soon. Bye. Bye,
Thank you.
Shahsad.